What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the Issues Work podcast, hosted by yours truly, Chuck Clements, and my brother, Stephen Hurley. Steve, what's up, bro?
It's going well. I'm excited to have a guest on today. One of the first guests that I've had that I personally know, so definitely excited to have him.
Yeah, no, it's another great episode. I think, like Steve said, another guest. Because I have a different perspective of college basketball in general, so we're super excited to have him and chop it up with him and hear his insights and stuff like that. But Steve, how about you introduce our special
Uh,
guest today? Give a little background, how you guys know each other, and stuff like that.
Absolutely. So today on we have Sean Macarchuk. He played his college ball at Trinity College in Connecticut. He went to prep school at St. Thomas More, and before that he was at Croton Harmon in Westchester, if anyone's familiar with that. How we knew each other, we played at AAU 8th grade through 10th grade, I guess. So that's how we kind of, started out. And ever since then, we've been in contact and we've been best buddies ever since. So, um,
Yes, sir.
yeah.
Got some
So,
food the other day, actually. We caught up.
yeah, we
Our
did. We
annual
did.
little grab and go for lunch.
Yeah.
But yeah,
If
looking
you're in
forward to being here
Westchester,
today. Yeah,
when
excited to
if
be
you're in
here.
Westchester, Mount Kisco Diner, very highly
Yes, sir.
recommended.
Great omelets.
I've heard about it. Is that the
Yeah,
one that has like the crazy like?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah, like the
Yeah.
crazy just everything. Yeah, I gotta try it. I gotta get my way down there. But nah,
But
Sean, thank you for hopping on, man. We're super excited to just chop it up and get
yeah,
to it.
appreciate it. Excited to be
Yeah,
here.
so we could start it out with a little bit of a opener, just your background in basketball, Sean, what got you into it growing up, and then
Yeah,
maybe you could kind of transition to, your experience at Croton Harmon. Obviously, you were a freshman at the time and a huge player on your team at the time, so just maybe walk through your experience from up until that point.
yeah. So a little background on myself in terms of how I got into basketball. I'm from a basketball family, so I grew up with it. For example, my grandfather was a Division I coach for over 40 years. And he actually started coaching career at St. Thomas More back in the 60s, and then was an assistant at Providence, then went to Canisius, Fordham, and then ended his career at Stony Brook. And so, I've been growing up with basketball, and in connection to St. Thomas More, he started coaching there originally, and he started a basketball camp there. And it expanded for about 6 years until COVID hit, and then kind of stopped after that because they didn't really do advertising. It was a word to mouth type of thing, and with a 2 year gap there, it
I don't
kind
mean
of
to cut you
ended.
off, Sean. Is this like the was like a CT basketball
CT
camp?
basketball,
I went to
yeah,
that
yeah, yeah.
camp. I went to that camp. That camp was fun.
No
Seriously, yeah,
way.
awesome, yeah. So Connecticut Basketball School. So I
That's
grew up,
awesome.
on the St. Thomas More campus, you know, and so grew up with that, and I was just kind of I wouldn't say forced into basketball. I was just like, I was expected to play when I was younger. So grew up with that, and yeah, that just made me love basketball. Every family meeting or being with family during the holidays, it all revolved around basketball, and just all the connections and everything. It's just like I didn't feel obligated to play, but there was a little edge there that you were kind of expected to go into basketball. So that's kind of how I started that, and the more and more, once I got to like third grade, I stopped playing other sports and kind of hyper fixated onto basketball and played on like multiple different teams in middle school, and did all these camps and everything. That kind of again led up to my freshman year. In Croton, there's like this summer camp that Coach Bill Tom used to run. His son is actually used to coach at Millbrook, but he just left. And he treated me like a son and held my hand in my growth when I was a younger kid. And so that he kind of like, held my hand in terms of the town camps. And that enabled me to meet all the other kids in my town, and especially older kids, because I would play up. And that kind of enabled me to have a great relationship with the seniors and juniors when I was a freshman at Croton. And I wasn't expecting to have like a pivotal role in the team at all. I just went in, um, I was like, okay, I'm gonna work as hard as possible and do whatever I can to, maybe earn a couple minutes here or there. But, all the work that I put in throughout, the duration of my life, which was, with my dad, I'm super thankful that my dad was able to help me out when I was a kid. Our goal per week, in middle school was, 200 makes a day. We never belonged to a gym. We would shoot outside at a park by my house and had like double and triple rims. And it was like, you had to pretty much swish it for it to go in. So it really, enabled me to focus on my shot and build, a good routine and enable myself to, develop my shot. And that kind of enabled me to become the shooter I was my freshman year, where um, like that was just kind of my role. I wasn't the strongest, I wasn't the fastest, I wasn't the most physically gifted. Again, I was like, 14 or 15 years old, so I had to find ways to be able to put me on the floor. Being super loud on defense, wasn't the quickest laterally, but I made up for that by, being communicative, calling out screens, being in the right place at the right time. And then, hitting shots when I needed to hit shots, and slowly, I mean, I ended up did starting my freshman year, but those little small things that made up for my lack of quickness and, athleticism is what enabled me to be on the floor and get meaningful minutes as a freshman.
I'll tell a quick story. Sean probably doesn't remember it, but we were playing at Zero Gravity Nationals, and we had the first game of pool play. Sean hit like seven or eight threes, and I'm after the game, like I might have, let's say I hit a three or something, I'd be pumped after the game. There I see Sean with his dad after the game, like they're talking about, his release, shots and whatnot.
Yep.
I'm like, if this kid's doing this after seven or eight makes in our huge game for us at the time, I'm like, he's gonna be one hell of a player. But that just so goes to show the attention to detail at that age was pretty high.
All about repetition. And, again, I want to really harp on the fact, and I'm super thankful that my dad was, he was pretty much like my shooting gun. I give a huge shout out to him for my development as a player. And, um, you know, sometimes we'd shoot in the rain, but like, during the summers and even in the winters, we'd be outside too. It's just 200 shots or 200 makes at least a day for pretty much all of middle school. And, he's like, if you want to play at this certain level, you're going to have to put in the work. The days I didn't want to shoot, he'd be like, let's go. Like, if you want to play in college, if you want to play at a high level in high school, we need to go put in the work today. Even if it stinks, it's going to pay off. And I really, really give him a lot of credit for who I became as a player.
Definitely.
Yeah, so obviously your first few years in high school you were at Croton Harmon, and then you decided to go to St. Thomas More, which is a huge decision for anyone to make. I
Yep.
just want to go into two parts of that. What
Yeah.
kind of led you to that decision, and then what was the biggest adjustment having to play at that level? Because playing at that level versus, Section 1 is a huge difference in my
Yeah, no,
opinion. So,
definitely
yeah.
agree. Um, so one of the main reasons why I left was because people in Croton, they all like, love basketball, but they weren't trying to play at the next level. We had, I think, one other Division III player on my team when I was at Croton. Um, and, no one really wanted to put in work outside of, the mandatory or optional workouts throughout the year is just, for fun and whatever. No, again, no one wanted to, go to the next level. And I felt like going to St. Thomas More would be the best way for me to not only increase myself athletically, but also academically. And I had a great relationship with the coach there. Again, my grandfather had the camp there every summer, so I knew the staff. It's like a second home to me. So I thought it was kind of a no-brainer. I looked at other boarding schools, but again, just an absolute no-brainer for me. So I ended up leaving. It was a really hard decision. I think I knew I was going to do a post grad year there, but just based on how Section 1 was going, how my team was at Croton, I just thought for me personally to, elevate my game, that was the best step for me to take. So I ultimately ended up going my senior year, which was the best decision I think I've ever made. And I went from being, probably the best player on the team to probably being the worst player at St. Thomas More. My first year, I think we had 11 or 12 scholarship players. And it was just a huge eye opener to me. But I also knew going into that was going to be the case, which I did on purpose. I wanted to, uh, test myself every day. Wanted to get better. Wanted a huge challenge, and that was a great way to do that. The speed, the quickness, the physicality, all of that. Again, it felt like I was a freshman again. Like I wasn't the fastest, wasn't the strongest, nowhere near was I the most athletic on the team. So again, it was like, what do I need to do now to adjust my game in order to make an impact here, right? Got to be the loudest on defense. Got to be positionally accurate on the defensive floor. Pointing, calling out screens, hitting shots when I need to hit shots, making the extra pass, diving on a loose ball. Doing the other things that coaches. But people always think it's about points and everything. It's just not. You got to do the little things that people you might not get the bonus points or whatever from the fans or whoever your buddies, but that's the things that really matter and are going to put you in an opportunity to thrive on the court. And again, when I was at Croton, another reason too is like why I decided to leave is because you can never get in the gym, right? You can never get in the gym. The coach Martucci was a great coach, but he's got a family. He lives 30 minutes away. There's other people there who don't want to open the gym. It's like everyone's super busy. Everyone's got lives. I totally get that. But there was minimal opportunities to get in the gym and get reps up, which is why I shot outside the park all the time with my father. And so at St. Thomas More, my schedule it was like almost like a military school. I woke up at 6 a.m. 5 times a week, Monday through Friday. I got shots up, would go to breakfast, go back, shower, go to class, lunch, class, practice, dinner, lift, study hall, bed by like 9:30, 10. And there was a class once or twice a week, where it was like a gym class, right? But it would be with our, assistant coach and it'd be like, workout class. So there was just unbelievable potential to, better my game. And I think ultimately it made me the player I am today. It set, it enabled me to create a schedule, create structure, and being on my own at that age turned me into a man. So it was, just every aspect of that school furthered my athletic and academic career.
A lot of people, when you talk about like NIPSAC and stuff like that, um, obviously it's a great basketball and everything like that. But a lot of people don't understand, like when you get to college, like, your schedule is like a college schedule. So
Yep.
probably got to college, the adjustment wasn't like too bad because you were
No,
used
not
to
at
like
all. Not at all.
2 years
If anything, it was
college.
harder
Yeah.
at St. Thomas More because everything was, it was
Yeah.
a lot to
Yeah.
manage.
Yes.
And yeah, it was definitely prepared me for the college realm.
Yeah. A lot of people don't realize that for sure.
I mean, yeah, just go back like when I was in 11th or 12th grade, I'd have an issue just getting the bus on time, let alone getting up at 6 a.m. But my side question to my original question to you, Sean, is what's the biggest takeaway you got from St. Thomas? Where did you really felt your game took like a next step by going to a NEPSAC prep school?
Yeah, I think again, going to a school like that where we're playing against Terrence Clark, all these high major players, and kids on my team are mid to low and even high major. It's like I had to figure out a way to increase every aspect of my game. You know, become a better shooter. I went to the gym every morning. I was like, I have to get my release off a little quicker now. These guys are bigger, stronger, and taller. When I get to the paint, I can't, go take a normal layup because some guy that's, in high school I would have been taller. It would probably been like a 6'4" big. Now I'm going up against guys 6'11". I'm not gonna be able to take a regular layup.
Right.
My shot's gonna get
Yeah.
punched. So I had to like develop like a floater game, or pump fake, kick out. I just had to be one step quicker, and again every aspect of my game. Pump fake, not like a full pump fake. Quick pump fake, quick one dribble, quick one first step. Just developing, yeah, every aspect and refining my skill set. And I think I really, honed in on becoming, consistent and not a streaky shooter.
Yeah. And then going from that to now, okay, at some point, right, we have to make our college decision because you're not going to do
Yep.
all this just for whatever.
Yep.
And what kind of starting out the process, what was maybe your goals of where you thought you could play? And
Yep.
then what schools you were involved with looking at, and then what ultimately made you choose Trinity
Yeah,
versus all those
absolutely.
other options?
Yeah, so I wasn't really getting heavily recruited at all when I was a junior at Croton, again, which is another reason. There was many aspects of why I left, but that was another aspect. So I ended up going to the Brown Elite Camp, which was like a high academic camp. Um, and I got a ton of interest from there. And actually, funny enough, Steve, Dylan Farley was at the camp, and him and I played on the
Really?
same team, um, which was,
That
I
was
don't even
our
know.
AAU center, Chuck.
Yeah,
He didn't
I
play
don't even know how it
basketball,
happened. It was like a
but
luck of the
yeah,
draw. We played on the same team.
that's too funny.
Um, and so I piqued some interest from there. And that was like, I would say June of my June, like going into my senior year. And
Mhm.
I didn't like fully make a decision of going to St. Thomas More yet or not. But I had a good feeling I was going to go there. So I like told all those schools I was going to St. Thomas More. And my original goal going into STM was like, I don't want my parents to pay for college. I know I'm probably not a Division I player, but I think, I could play in the NE10 or a Division II route. Um, and then once I got to St. Thomas More, I started getting, a little bit of interest from, more Division IIIs like Hamilton, Union, Springfield, Suffolk, um, just to name a few. And then I had a good season at St. Thomas More my senior year, and then COVID hit, right? So that kind of threw a wrench in everything. And ultimately, the best decision for me and my family was for me to do a postgraduate year. And in that conversation that I had with my coach, he said that, in terms of like guidance and in terms of, we had like a, sit down meeting with my parents and family. And we ultimately decided that in terms of longevity of my career, not only in basketball, but like professional, like post college, what the best route would be for me. It's like, okay, do I go to an okay academic school in Division II and get, a 2-year scholarship or, a 3 for 4 or 2 for 4, or go to, a high academic Division III and get a great education, have a great diploma and be able to use that to like, spearhead a good job. And we ultimately decided that that was the best route for me. So then my coach reached out to a bunch of schools that already had interest in me that were high academic towards the end of my senior year. And Trinity ended up in the mix. And I visited a ton of schools like during, I just went up with my parents because we couldn't with like the COVID restrictions and recruiting restrictions. So like my parents and I like went to a bunch of different schools and just roamed the campus. And then with all the other schools that I was talking to, since I couldn't visit the schools and see and meet the players in person, I would call, set up calls with the coaches and have them give me numbers for the kids on the team. So I did a lot of that. But ultimately, why I ended up deciding to go to Trinity, Coach Cosgrove is an STM grad. He coached at STM with my coach. He spoke at my grandfather's camp for a few years, so I had a relationship with him. And he also recruited me throughout my senior year a little bit, towards the end of my senior year at St. Thomas More. And I just, it was a great academic institution. The the campus was just I just fell in love with. I don't know if you guys have ever been to Trinity,
I've never been there
but
before.
there's like a thing called the Long Walk,
Okay.
and it almost reminds me of like Hogwarts. It's just like old brick, reminds me of like a
Yeah.
castle, and I just
Mhm.
instantly fell in love with the campus. And there was a person, in my town who went to Trinity who used to play basketball. He graduated probably like, 6 or 7 or maybe even more than that. He was like way older than me. And
Mhm.
his sister went to Trinity and spoke extremely high of the alumni network. And again, the meeting I had with my coach and my family was to prioritize, the academics and what would set me up best for post grad life.
Mhm.
And just so with the combination of, a great academic school, right? It's in the Nescac. A great reputation for basketball. They were leading prior to me attending Trinity. I think they were within like last decade. They had the most Nescac wins
Okay.
in conference, and I fell in love with the campus. And then the cherry on top was when I heard about like the alumni network, and coach Cosgrove really emphasized that as well. So those aspects ultimately led for me to decide on Trinity College. And I will say the alumni network, they were 100% right with that. When I was a junior at Trinity, I joined. I mean, you got to use your resources. Absolutely, you got to use your resources at Trinity, which I did using the Career and Life Center and everything. But there was like I did this program that stressed throughout a summer, and I was in like this group chat. Um, and my junior year, they sent a message to this group chat. They're like, "Oh, does anyone want to intern with this Trinity alum?" And it was during the school year and during my junior year season, and I signed up for it and interviewed. And through the Trinity alum, I got it. So again, really harping on the fact that the alumni network is super strong and super connected, and they'll do a lot for students. And I've had a ton of networking calls while I was at Trinity. Trinity alum always wanted to help and connect, and put you in contact with certain people, and so that aspect of Trinity was just phenomenal, and they weren't lying about that, and they it was great. So
Yeah, so then obviously you spoke about how Trinity had the most, I guess, in-conference wins. So you were obviously part of a very successful program. But what comes with that, with most teams in sports, obviously the guys who are not the star players, they probably feel like, okay, I could go somewhere else and get
Yep.
more minutes, more points, and whatnot. But what made you stay there? Because I looked at your guys' team always, and your guys' bench was probably the best bench in the country from what I saw,
Yeah.
throughout the years. And all you guys at some point probably had a thought about, okay, I could probably start at 90% of the other D3 schools in the country.
Yep.
So what made you stay?
Yeah, so, growing up in a basketball family, winning has always been heavily, heavily emphasized.
Right,
Like if you lose, like you're just gonna be moping around. It's like the worst thing ever. Losing
right.
is awful, I hate it. So my freshman and sophomore year, we had a lot of talent. We just couldn't like connect the pieces. Um, it was like right there both years. Like almost there, almost getting over the hump, and then we just, it just wouldn't happen. So we kind of, I guess, rebranded as a team. We sat down before the season started my junior year, and we kind of had like a come to Jesus meeting. We're like, okay, we're gonna write out these goals, we're gonna write out these team rules, and we're all gonna sign this piece of paper, and we're gonna tape it to the locker room door, and we're gonna abide by these rules. These are our goals per game. Like we're gonna get a couple shot clock violations. We're gonna out rebound this team so by this many points, or and we're gonna get this many force this many turnovers, get this many deflections. Um, and by us kind of making those guidelines and principles that enabled us to, really buy into the system, right? Everyone bought into their role. And, again, it was like the years before we just couldn't connect the dots. But once we enabled and, made these rules, everyone bought into their role and bought into, the most important thing, which is winning. Um, you know, and I think that's what really kind of spearheaded our success was, it didn't matter how many points, let's say I was going to score that game or whoever. Like no one cared about stats, individual stats. They cared about the scoreboard, looking at the scoreboard when the buzzer went off at the end of the game. It's like, okay, we're victorious. Like that's the most important goal for us this season.
And then going off that point a little bit, obviously watching you guys for the past few years, you guys basically do like hockey subs, 5 in,
Yep.
5 out. What spearheaded that idea, and why do you think it works so well? Because I've not only seen many teams do that, and if they do, I usually is because okay, those 5 guys are doing horribly. Like I don't know if
Yeah.
Chuck remembers this, but at RPI 1 or 2 times we've had to sub 5 guys out, and it's not because those 5 guys are playing well. It's because something seriously went
Yeah.
wrong.
Yeah. So I don't I don't really know what started it my junior year, to be honest.
Yeah,
I think he was just trying something out, Coach Cosgrove was, and it started working. So I think the reason why it worked so well is because one, we just had so much depth, and
yeah,
two, like, our games would be pretty close until the end, until like, 10 minutes left in the second half. So if you have, the starting five in till 14 minutes left in the first half. Then you put the second five in from like 14 minutes to 9 to 7, depending on how we were doing, and then putting the starters back in for the rest of the half. It's just, fresh legs after fresh legs, and you're just going to tire a team out.
right,
And
right.
depending on the game, like, sometimes the second unit would come in and go on a run and play better than the first unit, or, vice versa. And I think why we were so successful in that is because we had great depth and we just tired teams out. By the second half, they're like, they're playing 8 guys, 7 guys. Um, and we're playing 10 guys that were just so deep and just like full fresh legs, and we're just they get tired. So it's just wear and tear, just beat them down. And that was kind of our motto. We're just gonna go balls to the wall, hard as possible. Do every if you're not playing hard, you're getting subbed out. That's how it was you got to kind of ask to be subbed out. That's how hard you got to work. And that was Coach Cosgrove's mentality. It was just, full throttle, pedal to the metal. You just got to work as hard as possible. And if you got to run through a wall, you got to run through a wall. That's just the mentality we had.
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense. Like when you have like a, I wish you could see that a little bit more too. When you have like a deep team, it's like why not just get fresh legs in, like, and just his entire team's out. And
Yeah.
obviously, Steve watched Trinity play pretty recently, and he said they were still doing that. So, and it's crazy. But
Yeah.
going
And
back to Steve's point, how you're obviously a great player. You definitely could have started in many different other teams throughout college basketball. And obviously, we touched on what your mentality was. Do you have like any advice for, say, a player in high school who may think that they should be getting a little bit more minutes over somebody else, and they might have like a bad attitude on the bench? Obviously, that's not a good look. Coaches hate that
yep.
stuff, but at the end of the day, it's hard. Like, what I'm saying?
Yep.
We all have egos. We all want to play. What's like your advice to a kid who's just like not getting the minutes that he wants right now?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I've been there as a player as well. You just got to remain positive and, you got to take it day by day. That's literally what it comes down to. What you just got to keep putting in the extra reps outside of practice or stay late, get shots up. Be the first one, last one in, right?
Hmm.
Be there early, stretched, all ready to go, getting shots up, and then staying after, asking the coach to shoot, assistant coach, and even like during games too. You got to be the first guy off the bench, running to high five,
Hmm.
people coming off the court, just doing everything possible to be a good teammate. Because then you're gonna remain positive, and yeah, just being an energy guy, that goes a long way, especially at practice. If it's a quiet gym and you're the loudest, that shows that you want to be there, and that's going to bring the team, energy and chemistry up.
Hmm.
And you got to be a good energy guy and just positivity all around because that will boost morale, and the coaches will notice that, and it definitely helps everything.
Yeah, and like you said, you're kind of talking about it earlier, but I think just like sacrifice is like such a huge part of that because if the goal for the team and individually, obviously with your team, you guys all bought in
Yep.
is winning. It's like if you're not kind of sacrificing and people kind of see that you have this bad attitude, it's not translating to winning games. So that's a huge point. Moving on, you've been on some like great teams at Trinity. You guys obviously won a national championship, been to the Final Four.
Yep.
Were there like any differences in the team that won the national championship the year after you guys made to the Final Four, or what kind of got you guys over that hump?
So what? Yeah. So I would say skill wise, I think we are pretty similar both years, but in relation to what made the second year going to the Final Four more successful, and we talk about this, or I've talked about this multiple times, is the first year when we went, it was like, oh my God, like we can't believe we made this. It was like we were happy to be there.
Right,
It's like whatever happened happened.
right.
We were super stoked. The Trinity like raised a lot of money and chartered us on a plane out there. So
Hmm.
we were on like cloud nine. We got a ton of gear when we got there. We got like a police escort to the game. Got
Hmm.
all this gear. Did all like the media day stuff.
Nice.
We were super ecstatic, and it felt fake almost. It felt like unreal that we were there, and just we couldn't really fathom and wrap our heads around us being there, right?
Hmm.
So I think from like us being on like a natural high like that, it kind of, took away from the focus and our ability to kind of focus in on this game and which ultimately we lost, right? But I think that was part of the reason that we didn't lock in as much as we should have versus this past year, we like after we won the Elite Eight game, to go to the Final Four, we all were like in the locker room. We're like, we've been there, have done this. We know we're gonna get gear. It's gonna be cool and whatever. But this is a business trip. We don't want to go there again and lose in the first round. Like this is we're changing the narrative. We're going in. It's a business trip, strictly business. We can have fun after when we take home the trophy. Yeah, we have full expectations of going there and winning the whole thing. Again, because we've been there, done that. The fun's over. Now it's business.
What was that feeling like when you guys ended up getting that national championship? Like
Yeah,
that's
dude.
crazy.
It was surreal, and like when I like my buddies make fun of me all the time for it. There's like a clip of me like after we get like the rebound,
Uh-huh.
or Terrell gets the rebound and they foul us, but there's like 0.2 seconds left on the
Mhm.
clock, and I'm like starting to cry on the sideline. And the reason like I was like starting to get super emotional, it's like like all the AAU practices, all like the late nights or the early morning workouts, and just all the sacrifice and time, it like all kind of hit me. I was like, wow, this is like really like all that was worth it. It's
Yeah.
like this is like just an unbelievable experience and feeling, and it was like again, it's like I've been shooting outside at the park down the street from my house since like third grade, and it's just all like it all flashed before my eyes. It was just like boom, like that was just all that hard work, dedication, commitment, and just time and effort and sweat and tears and just the car rides to AAU tournaments in Pittsburgh and flights down to Florida and bus rides to Colby or Hamilton that it took like 4 or 5 hours from Trinity. It's
Right,
like
right, right.
all that time and energy spent is just it was awesome, and it was like such an unbelievable way to go out as a senior. It was just
Yeah,
super thankful and grateful.
right.
But yeah, it was just an unbelievable experience.
Yeah, I probably feel a little bit better too after, making it to that Final Four and then getting over that hump once again. So,
Exactly.
yeah,
Yeah,
that's
a business trip.
yeah,
Business
literally
trip.
nice. Um, One thing, obviously, we're all D3 guys here.
Yep.
A lot of people have like just a negative connotation about like what D3 basketball is in general. It's like if I'm not going D1, I'm not playing anywhere. Like what I'm saying, D1 obviously you want to get to that point, but a lot of people don't understand how good D3 basketball is.
Yep.
We recently just had Middlesex Magic director Mike
Yep.
Crotty
Karate.
on
Yep.
the podcast. Yep, and he went to Williams, and even back then he had a national championship, all that stuff. But he was saying the Nescac was just great
It's
basketball.
just
And
unbelievable. Yeah. I mean, you got
yeah,
Duncan Robinson, who was in then played at Williams.
literally. So
2013, I think he was there. Maybe I
yep,
could be off
yep,
on the wrong date. Don't
yeah,
quote me on that. But
yeah.
just high academic D3. It's not a joke. You see
Right.
all these teams that have exhibition games with Division I schools
Hmm.
and they're close. Like Bowdoin, who was in my conference,
Hmm.
had a game against Harvard last year, and they were up at halftime. I think they ended up losing by under 10.
Hmm.
It's just like there's very little gap in like skill set. It's more like size and athleticism.
Right.
Um, but Division high academic D3 is like I've had arguments before with people that again they could it wouldn't I don't know if it would be super close, but you could compete with low level Division I teams absolutely.
I agree.
And I've gotten into heated arguments with people about that, but I
Hmm.
stand firmly on that. And
Yeah.
there's a very low discrepancy between low level Division I and high academic D3. There's people in the Division III world that chose to go D3 over low level Division I
If you
just
want
because of
offers, yeah.
academics.
Right.
Just because of academics, and same like if you're with the Division II schools, they people
Hmm.
will go, people will have. I know people, and people on my team had Division II offers,
Hmm.
um, and decided to go D3 over that because of academics.
Right.
So there is very little discrepancy, as I mentioned before.
Right.
Yeah, it's D3 is super competitive, and it's great basketball, fundamentally sound, great coaching, great academics. There's a lot of positives and a lot of upside um, with going D3.
Right. And you obviously played in arguably probably the best conference in D3, the NESCAC we mentioned before, with teams like Trinity, like you played on Wesleyan, Williams. Who else they got in there?
Amherst, Colby,
Yes,
Hamilton, yeah,
a
the
lot of teams are really
academic
strong.
opportunities in that conference. And, you got the UAA too.
Right.
You got Liberty League. You got a
Yeah.
lot of in the Northeast. There's a lot of good high academic D3
Hmm.
hoops.
Hmm. Yeah.
That again, like you go there for the education and great hoops. It's a double. It's a double whammy.
Right.
It's
Right.
best of
Right.
both worlds there.
Mhm.
Um,
What was that? What was that NESCAC experience like? You're playing, like you said, you got to travel a lot.
yeah,
Um, and you're playing against high level teams, and that's like I said, one of the best conferences in the country. What was that NESCAC experience like in terms of like the basketball games and
yeah. I mean, every game you didn't know who was going to win any games.
right.
It was a toss up every
Hmm.
single game because it's so competitive.
Hmm.
And what made it harder too is we play Friday, Saturday.
Yeah, that's you
You
guys. Yeah.
play Friday at 7 p.m. You got to get on a bus and then go play at like 2 or 3 p.m. on a Saturday.
Hmm.
You have very minimal time to rest. So it
Hmm.
really, again, this is why I think the 5 in, 5 out also really helped us down the stretch as these teams come off of
Sure.
back-to-back games and their seventh and eighth guy or their starters are super tired and we
Hmm.
just light the fire under them because we have 5 fresh legs coming in
Hmm.
and sometimes we even go down to our 11th depending if whatsoever. But I think that's also what helped us play so well in the tournament. um, you know playing the Friday Saturday schedule with the 5 in, 5 out you got teams in the UAA who play Wednesday, Wednesday, Saturday, or Wednesday, Sunday, whatever their schedule is. Yeah, and they're flying everywhere, and other teams don't play a back-to-back regular season schedule. So I
Mhm.
think that also gave us an upper hand when it came to the postseason. But yeah, during the regular season and the NESCAC again, going back to that, it was a toss-up every game. You had to prepare mentally and physically every game because it was gonna be a dogfight. It's gonna be, as
Mhm.
my coach said, it would be a rock fight. It's just
Right.
it's an all-out war every single game. You're playing in the most competitive league in the conference or in Division Three, so you don't know who's going to win, and it's just again, it's a rock fight every game. So we
Yeah.
went in with the mentality of just again, full throttle, foot on the gas, just no brakes, and just keep going.
Yeah, that's a great point that you make about the Friday Saturday game. So I'm thinking now, like with Liberty League, we do Friday Saturday. And I feel like Steve, whenever any Liberty League team went to the tournament, like they did pretty well, honestly. And it's, I guess a lot of
Yeah,
teams don't have that back to back. Like us, who went far? Hobart went far one year before we got there.
Ithaca won a game last year.
It's
It was a
because
close second
yeah,
round game. Yeah.
that's actually a great point. But
Eh, yeah.
no, yeah, go ahead. What were you
I
gonna
was just gonna say too, Sean's in the NESCAC. For Liberty League, we could travel some far distances in between games at times,
say?
but usually it's not more than 3 hours.
Right.
The NESCAC, I'm pretty sure, Sean, you could attest this. It's pretty spread out sometimes.
Yeah, we would do like travel partners though. Like if
Hmm.
we play, I'm
Okay.
trying to think where
So,
we would go to. Oh goodness, we would go. Maybe we would go up, let's say on a Friday, we'd play at Bates, which was like 4.5 hours. And then after the game, we would drive down like uh pretty close to like Tufts or something, and then get up in the morning and drive like another hour. But I remember one time we played, it was my freshman year. We got smoked by Tufts.
Hmm.
Um and so we drove 4 hours, or not 4 hours, we drove like two hours to Tufts that day. And then there was a snowstorm, and Bates is like, I don't know, 2.5 hours north of Tufts. And we got to the hotel at like 2 in the morning because we were driving 30 miles per hour on the highway with the snow. And then we had to like get up at 10, maybe even earlier, get breakfast, and then get going for the game. So it was like, whoa.
That's the
yeah.
one thing about D3. It's gonna get gritty. Like you're gonna have to go through some stuff where it's like,
Oh,
damn,
yeah.
you know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? But it makes you a better person in my eyes. But that's funny that you mentioned that. Obviously Steve touched on it before. You're talking about how you got up a lot of shots with your dad growing up, known as like the elite shooter. Were there like any things that you did technically with your shot? Maybe did you have like any habits, routines, like a mindset thing? Like what made you think like that level of a shooting ability?
Yeah, so I can, my uncle when I was growing up, he would always, it was his quote. It was, shoot or shoot to get hot, shoot or shoot to stay hot. So
Mhm.
that was like, if I miss a shot, I'm not going to put my head down. I know most likely that the next one's in. That was my mentality. It's like, next shot, next play, like it's all going to be good. So
Mhm.
that was like constantly, replaying in my head during the games. But like growing up, yeah, yeah, again, I really want to harp on the fact that it's all about repetition. My shot's pretty ugly. Steve can attest to that. It's my elbows out. I kind of like got
As
my
long as it
shot
goes
from,
in, Sean, I don't know that there's
yeah,
much
as
to
long as it
complain
goes in, it
about.
doesn't matter. But I kind of like, I don't know, like sculpted my shot from like Jimmer's shot. I kind of
Yeah.
looked up Jimmer for that when I was a kid. And I always like shot with my elbow out.
Hmm.
But again, I want to like talk about like the repetition, the my goal when I was younger was to, 200 makes a day, like
Hmm.
6 days a week, just to, boom, just to make it become automatic and like a second nature where you don't even think about it. Because sometimes when you think about your shot, when you move your hand on the ball a little bit, or you tweak your elbow, or whatever, and then you start missing right, left, and um, so definitely want to, that was very important when I was a kid. But we also did like a lot of, shooting games, time shooting games to see how many shots I could make in like, a minute. Um, I'm not gonna lie, I didn't do like a ton of like around the basket form shooting. I really focused on just repetition from like the mid-range area, and then would, work back to the three. And then once I got a little older, I, worked on coming off screens, coming off like pick and pops, like pump fake side steps, pump fake one dribble floater again at STM, and I have to shoot it over guys that are 6'11". So, and I knew I wasn't going to be, doing between cross sidestep, doing all these, dribble combos to get my shot off. I know
Right.
I was going to be, running off screens or catching it, doing a jab, and then shooting it with very minimal dribble. So I knew my role as a player and my capabilities. So I stuck within that and kind of, siloed my aspect of a basketball player. I wasn't trying to be someone who I knew I wasn't going to, like, wasn't capable of being. Um, so again, it was just focusing on aspects of basketball that I knew I would be good at and knew my role at. Um, and then once I got to college, I'm not going to be a player that's dribbling down the floor, getting a high ball screen, taking two dribbles and doing a sidestep. I know like my capabilities. So it was more about like once I got to college, it was more about maintenance, right? Making sure I'm getting shots up, making sure I'm doing what I'm doing to make sure I don't, fall off in terms of my shooting capabilities. And what I really focused on once I got to school, because I was a late bloomer and didn't really have a ton of physicality, was putting on weight, putting on muscle, and that was my main focus once I got to college, was really, hyper fixating on my strength and lateral quickness because I still again wasn't the fastest. So I made sure I got my legs strong and made sure I put on. And I think I came into college at like 180 maybe, and I think I peaked at like 210. But now I've lost weight since then. But I had like it was a huge, even with STM too. It was a huge step in terms of physicality. And I'm going into school at 19 and playing against guys that are 23.
Right.
And they're men, they're grown men. So it's like
Right.
I needed to wake up and focus on that.
All right. Something, obviously you just mentioned like shooting is such like a mentality thing. Obviously the best shooters have the most confidence and stuff, but everyone goes through a shooting slump, where your shot's just not falling in and you think the world's gonna end and like you just have a poor attitude towards it. What was like your approach when you weren't shooting the ball that great? Um, like how'd you kind of get over that shooting slump and get over that hump?
Yeah, again, it's the quote that my uncle always said to me when I was a kid is, shoot or shoot to get hot and shoot or shoot to stay hot. And, my mentality, again, as I mentioned before, was just, next one, next play, next one. It's like your shot's gonna fall. You do everything in your power to like prepare. So some days it's basketball. It's life. Some days it's
Right.
not gonna be your day.
Hmm.
Um, and there's definitely times throughout my college career where I was in a slump, and I just kept shooting. My coach had confidence in me. My teammates had confidence in me. I had confidence in myself. It was just a matter of when it's going to click and when I'm going to recalibrate, and it's all going to be good.
Hmm.
So it's just again repetition, having confidence in yourself. If you're a shooter, you know you're a shooter, and you know that you're going to be due. You know that you're due. Um, it's just a matter of time before once you see the first one going after a slump, it's over. And it's just the floodgates open and the rim turns like this big, and it's just like so that was my mentality.
Yeah. Looking back to AU, obviously you guys played together. AU is such a it's a huge thing now, right? Especially
Yep.
with just college and all this money's into it. Players
Yep.
want to be on every circuit. There's like 30 circuits now that I feel like weren't there when we were in high school.
Yeah.
But like I think a lot of times some players can get a part of some these maybe not bigger name AU teams, but they get part of these AU teams and they kind of lose like the development of their actual
Yep.
game. It's just
Yep.
like they're playing 5 games a weekend. Practices sometimes aren't, run the best or,
Or
stuff
you have
like
one
that.
a week. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
just
right. It's how it is. So, what do you think? Like, what was like the best way you kind of developed through that AAU stage?
yeah. So I mean, on the weekends, your weekends are just totally shot because you're
Right.
playing 3 to 5 games, depending on
Hmm.
how the team does. Um, and I think a lot of people, I know how this is how it was at least when I was playing, and I'm sure it's the same way to an extent. Is
Hmm.
people would try to get on like these big name teams and just not play. Like they would just sit the bench,
Yeah.
right, and not have an opportunity to showcase their skill set.
Hmm.
So one, I would say get on a team where you know you're gonna play, or at least be like in the rotation, because you don't want to like pay all that money, go all that travel, and all this yada 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 to just not play. Even if you're playing at like what you think is a lower level,
Hmm.
that shouldn't really matter because you're trying to show your skill set.
Hmm.
That's one. Two, if you're trying to like aim for like a Division 3, route or Division 2, I would highly recommend to going to like elite camps, like high, like the Brown Elite Camp. There was like when I went, there was probably like 60 coaches there, or it was crazy. So I would definitely go to like high academic elite camps. Um, the third one I would say, third point I would make is, all these, you're having one practice a week with AAU, right? That's
Mhm.
not going to be enough to accelerate your game to the next level. You got to do stuff on your own or go to like, training classes with, coaches or whatever. Or go to the court, get, 200 shots or 200 makes, work on the stuff you need to work on. Go to the track, get sprint work in, go to the gym. You got to do stuff outside of your obligated commitments with the AAU program. You
Mhm.
can't just rely on, oh, I'm gonna go outside, shoot for 5 minutes, and I'll be good for practice on Thursday, where you probably just play live the whole time. Then you got games on Saturday, Sunday. That's not going to develop your game at all.
Mhm.
You're going to kind of plateau or even get worse because you're not going to be getting the reps in.
Right.
So I would highly recommend putting in a lot of work throughout the weeks to prepare for the weekend to make sure your game is well rounded, make sure you're in shape. Because you're playing
Mhm.
3 or 4 games on a weekend, you're going to be kind of tired.
Right.
You're going to make sure you're in shape, your game's well rounded, your shots calibrated, good to go. Make sure you got your reps up. Um, and yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think I was just gonna add too, if Sean, you know, what's one or two habits that really made the difference? It'd probably be, you'd say, Sean, getting those daily reps and,
yep,
doing that stuff outside of the mandatory, like AU one practice or playing for this specific AU team. I
Mhm.
think that kind of gets lost now. People want to, they just think it's like a one-way ticket. If I'm on this team, I'll, get
yeah,
to
I'll get
these
these looks.
opportunities.
Yeah, nope.
Right. And it's just not how it works.
Not at all. Not at all. Looking back on your time at Trinity, obviously you won. We went over that, but you probably had the best times with the guys like off the court.
Yep.
Just what were some special experiences that you had with the guys off the court that you kind of look back and are like, damn, like I kind of missed
Yeah,
that.
so I really, I think part of the reason why we were so successful, besides, like the team rules and all the guidelines that we made and goals, was the chemistry off the court. We ate lunch, breakfast, lunch, dinner pretty much every single day together. Which was just, you build so much camaraderie, just, laughing and crying. We have tears in our eyes all the time, eating food at the calf. And, oftentimes at dinner, we would be there till like it would close because we were just having a great time. And we'd be there for like 2 hours sitting, just BSing and doing whatever. So I think that aspect, really built us as a team and as a unit together. And then, after games on Saturdays, we would all get together and have captains mandatory meetings and, doing whatever as a team. So again, like, being together all the time, team meals, it would just really, bond us and unite us. And, I, I said it in the post game interview after we won this year is they're like, oh, what's the one thing you're gonna miss? And I touched on like J term, which is, when only the other teams are on campus for winter break. Um, and what we would do like every night is the whole team or majority of the team, we would all get on like Fortnite, like Zone Wars, if you guys know what that is. So it'd be like
Yeah.
10 of us all screaming at each other on the mic every night for like a month straight.
Yeah.
Just chopping it up
There
and
you
just
go.
having a great time,
Mhm.
and just trying to pass the time because there's nothing to do during winter break there. So again, like us being so close off the court, and we could like get in fights at practice or whatever, but once we step off, out of the gym, it's like we're best buddies. So it's like the
Right.
competitiveness on the floor and just us like going at each like the practices were super hard, super difficult, super physical, which is what prepped us for games and everything. But us being able to once we leave the court, not take what we had on there. If someone's beefing with each other or, going at each other's throats or doing, whatever. Once we left the court, it was like, throwing that away. We're good to go. We're all going to be brothers and all still going to love each other and everything. So I think, again, really want to harp on the fact that, us being super united and like connected outside of the court was what, kind of propelled us to be successful too. Just that was like I think that was a missing piece the freshman sophomore year. We like had little cliques and we're a little
Yeah.
divided and wouldn't hang out as much. And then we
Hmm.
kind of united the gap and brought everyone together junior year.
Yeah.
And that kind of I think cemented us as a team.
Yeah. No, it's huge. Like obviously, being at RPI, Steve, we're with the guys 24/7. And I think it does correlate to on-court success. It's like now, I love this guy off the court. Now on the court, I'm gonna do everything I can for this guy to win. So
Exactly. I'm gonna
yeah,
run over, pick him up. I'm gonna, do
exactly,
whatever I need to do to, if he's open, one more pass there.
exactly,
It's
exactly,
like whatever we need to do to succeed. I want to do with these guys because they're my brothers. So that's kind
exactly.
of the mentality that we had.
Yeah.
I was going to say the biggest kind of thing you could tell for that is whenever, let's say, a team goes on a 10-0 run, the other team takes a timeout, our bench would always be like,
Turned
I'll give a
up.
shout out, Ryan and Sully last year. They would come on the court and they were freshmen, Sean, and
Uh-huh.
you'd act like it would be like it looked like they won the lottery. Like that's how
Literally,
happy they
literally.
were. But
Yeah, yeah,
that's the true sign of like, everyone really wants to see everyone do their best. And
yeah.
those are the teams that usually do better than what they're expected to.
Most
So.
definitely, most definitely. And then for my last question, I just some advice. Like say like some of the freshmen in high school, or I guess you could look back to yourself freshman in high school. What's your advice for someone trying to get to the level that you got to at that college season?
Yeah, I mean, realistically, I think I've said it a few times today. It's like you just got to put the work in. You got to, even on days you don't want to do it, you're like, oh, I'm tired. Like, I don't want to, get shots up, lift today, or go work out. You just got to look at it as a perspective is like, if I do this now, I'll be happy in the future because I know I put in the time, the effort, and what was needed to enable myself to get to the next level. Getting shots up 6 times a week, going to the track, doing hill work, or I didn't really lift a ton when I was a freshman because I was still growing and I didn't like want that to affect me negatively. But lifting, getting stronger, and if again I wasn't the quickest, I wasn't the strongest, wasn't the fastest, finding key ways to put yourself on the floor and making people see you. Being loud on defense, like talking, diving for the ball, making the extra pass, being a great teammate, being energetic, being the first guy off the bench, high fiving your teammates, running to spots in practice, just doing everything in your power to be the best teammate, and do everything possible to enable your team to win. It's just you got to be can't just be hyper fixated on like, oh, I want to, I didn't play well today because I didn't score. It's like, okay, how many rebounds did you have? How many deflections? What did you do well in defense? Did you make the extra pass? There's so many different variables in basketball that can enable you to get recruited or seen, or it's not all about the highlight reel. It's about the wins. And it's about the small things, and coaches do see that. Other people might not. People aren't familiar with basketball,
Yeah,
but if you're really trying to get looked at and you're trying to be successful, you have to be pretty sound in all facets of the sport.
I agree. I agree. Well, this is a great episode, Sean. I appreciate you for hopping on and chopping up with us and giving a lot of insights to the younger generation because I think it's huge. I think it's great to hear people like yourself, all of our other guests, Steve, that been through it and kind of give some knowledge back. So we appreciate you for having
Yeah,
on.
appreciate you having me today.
Yes,
Thank you.
sir. Sir, well, make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe, and we'll be back next week.